Welcome to the webinar. This is Richie. Now, there's a general consensus that in order to succeed in most data roles, whether you're a data analyst or data scientist or data engineer, you need three sets of skills. So firstly, you need technical skills like SQL programming and statistics. And secondly, you need some domain knowledge, which typically means some sort of business understanding. And thirdly, you need professional skills like being able to create a presentation and run a meeting. There's lots more to it, of course, and that's why we're here today. So we have a Cotton Club going on. Our guest is James Cotton. So we did have a chat and decided we don't think we're related. But hi, James. So James is a founder and the head coach at iO-Sphere. And iO-Sphere runs a very interesting data bootcamp program that's powered by Datacamp. So participants use Datacamp to learn technical skills and combine this with professional work experience. So that means James spends a lot of time thinking about how to help people get their first jobs in data. I'm very keen to hear his insights. So over to you, James.
Thank you very much for that, Richie. Yes, so today I'm really excited to present on how to get a job in data, or at least my perspective of it, because I'm sure that everybody has lots of different perspectives. I'm going to start, though, by introducing myself, just so that everybody knows who I am, and just talk a little briefly about what it is that iO-Sphere is. So I'm Canadian originally, in case you can't tell from my accent, but I've been living over here in the UK, in London, for 9 years now. And I moved here after I did my master's, which is actually in business. And I've mostly worked in analytics, pricing, and data science teams, and mostly scaling them out over the last 8 or 9 years. I did 1 year in car insurance before I moved over to hotels.com, which is part of the Expedia group. I spent 3.5 years there. I was working in marketing analytics and customer analytics and a lot on the big loyalty program that they have. And that's where I really started to fall in love with data. I then went to a fintech company, which is sort of like a digital Western Union, called World Dream It. And there I also spent quite a bit of time trying to build them out, a team around analytics, pricing, and data science. So actually the main thing that I've really done over the last 7 or 8 years is hiring people in this space. I probably interviewed myself from a technical perspective, maybe 400 people, and hired about 75. Since then, I actually left, and with my co-founder Oscar, I've started a company called iO-Sphere, which, as you said, we run intensive training programs which are designed to recreate a high-performing and modern data team at an e-commerce company. We do that because, as you said, it's not just the technical skills that are required in order to become a great data professional. You actually need hands-on experience working with real data, and you need the full, complete skill set, including business acumen, professional skills, soft skills, and also the career support in order to get into data. So today what we're going to be talking about is how to actually get a job in data, which is something that I'm very passionate about, just in terms of what it is that we're going to be talking and covering. We're going to start by what actually we mean by a job in data. We're going to talk about the experience and skills that are required. Following, we're going to talk about how to actually approach the job search, because that's a large part of it. It takes quite a bit of effort. Once you get an interview, how do you actually prepare for that, and how do you make sure that you nail that interview? And then once you've actually managed to get the job, what should you do to prepare yourself so you can be really successful from day one? And as you said, at the end, we'll take time to answer any questions that we've gotten so far. But first, what do we actually mean by a job in data? This is actually a great question because it's one that comes up a lot. But before we do that, I really want to talk about the fact that jobs in data are great jobs. If you're thinking about a career in data or thinking about switching into data, then this is definitely something that you should be considering. These are high growth, they're impactful jobs. They're quite interesting. You're not doing the same thing every day. You're spending a lot of time thinking analytically, thinking critically. It can be a lot of fun. You're working with lots of different people. You get to really understand the inner workings of a business or the organization that you're working for. And you get to do a lot of different things every day. So if you are thinking about transitioning into data or starting a career in data, then I would absolutely encourage you to do so. These are some of the highest growth areas that exist in the market today. Some government agencies expect the total number of openings to be growing by 25% per year over the next couple of years. And so there's definitely an opportunity to get involved and to really have an impact, which can lead to a lot of career satisfaction. But one of the tricky things that really comes up when people look at jobs and data and try to understand how it is that they can approach the industry is that there are lots of different titles. And it's very hard to understand what it is that an individual job role or a job title in a specific company or industry actually does. And that's because there's no actual standardized process in terms of how it is that companies go about setting those titles or know what a very specific individual will end up doing. Across the companies that I've worked in, different people with the same title will do different types of roles. And so it's really important that people start to understand that there's a lot of different types of profiles available to them. And different ones are going to fit different skill sets and different interests. And so it's actually possible for people from all sorts of different backgrounds to end up in data. Here on the left, I've actually included a chart just to give you a little bit of a flavor that I took from a website, but I think it's quite useful in trying to start to explain some of the differences that we see in different job profiles. And you can see some of the different skills around the outside of the chart, which are really common within some of the core data functions, working with data, building data pipelines, bringing in new tooling. From more of the to storytelling, data visualization, insights, or experimentation, a lot of the machine learning or AI or stats kind of stuff. And also, how do we take products that we built and how do we put them into production? And so you can see that here we've got 3 different job profiles: data engineers, analysts, data scientists, and machine learning engineers. And you can see that although there's a huge overlap in the type of skills that they do, which is part of the part we do, which can be a bit confusing to people from the outside, they will generally start to focus in different areas. So for example, data analysts tend to spend a lot of their time working with stakeholders, understanding the business, telling great stories with data, working with data to visualize them and bring insights, whereas data scientists might be doing a little bit more about statistical modeling or building machine learning models, which machine learning engineers might then take and put into production. But those are just 4 of the job profiles. But you can imagine that there's tons and tons that have existed because what's happened over the last, I would say 7 or 8 years, is that we've gone from having very generalist data profiles to having much more specific ones. And we've specialized individual job profiles to make people to allow people to be a lot more specific in terms of the type of work that they're working on. And so you've got people working across data quality, reporting, visualization, all sorts of different things. Data governance is a really big one that's come out in the last couple of years. And so there's generally something for pretty much everybody, but it can be a little bit difficult to figure out which one you want from the outside. If I had to make a recommendation for those who are looking to get into data, if you're thinking about it from more of a technical perspective, so you enjoy the coding or the numerical aspect of it, then I would highly recommend trying to start as a data analyst, because that's the easiest way to get in. That's where the most entry-level opportunities are. And it's also the easiest way to have an impact because you're not sort of dependent on having really strong coding skills in order to be able to deliver value. If you're a little bit less comfortable on the numerical side, then getting into something more around data quality or getting into data governance is a really great place for you to start. But overall, there's definitely an opportunity for pretty much everybody that's out there. But what kind of skills and experience do you need? This is also a really broad topic of conversation because there's actually tons of different profiles and different things that you could end up doing. But as Richie was saying earlier, you need to think about it in terms of a complete skill set of a portfolio of skills that different people have. Technical skills are super important. If you're going into a technical role, you need to have the technical skills because if you can't do the work, then it's not possible for you to get the job. And that's where Datacamp is great. And actually, that's what we use to teach all of the technical skills throughout all of our intensive training programs because they have great online interactive coding sessions and videos and all of that kind of thing. But you need to make sure that as you're building out your own skill set, you're thinking about all of the different skills that are available, different buckets of skills. Soft skills are incredibly important. You need to be really happy working with teams, working with other people, collaborating. You have to give presentations all of the time. You need to be able to influence. You need to be able to do all of those bits in order to make sure that you are able to have an impact with your work. If you're going into some of the more technical roles, you really need to be able to think analytically and think critically about the data that's coming in and also the information that you're collecting from your colleagues or coworkers. Because how you actually structure a problem is usually something that will come up during an interview process, but it's like a really core component to how it is that data professionals work. You definitely need professional skills. You need to be able to manage a project. You need to be able to run a meeting. You need to be able to do all the bits associated with being a professional. And the fifth bucket, which is super important, is business acumen or domain knowledge, as Richie referred to it. It's very difficult to work in data and not to understand the actual source of data and the functions that you're working with. And so one of the areas that I highly recommend that people spend a lot of time on is really trying to understand the company or organization that they're trying to apply to. So they can start to understand how it is that it works, the type of data that they generate, how it is that could potentially use to add value. Because if you don't understand what it is that the business is doing, it's very difficult for you to take meaningful insights from that data and actually use that and translate that into impact for the organization that you're working for. I also often get asked, so what makes a great data professional? So, what are the sort of raw attributes that really help? You'll notice that actually most of these are not necessarily the technical or newer ones that people are talking about. One for me is that you have to be super collaborative. You have to like working in a team. It's very rare to find a data team or a company where actually you're not going to be continuously working with stakeholders or engineering teams or your manager or just the rest of your teammates itself. It's really important that when you approach data, you need to understand that you won't be doing that in a silo, that you're going to be working with other people. And so that's a really important thing to start to highlight through your job application process and also through your interviews, that you like working in a team, you like working with people, you're capable of working with all sorts of different people. The second one is being curious. This is, I think, one of the hardest things to teach when it comes to data professionals. You have to really want to understand what's going on under the hood. You have to want to be able to break things down into their constituent parts. You need to be really focused on trying to understand the business and the data and all of the different components. That innate curiosity is what really allows a good data professional to become a great one. And you need to really want to get into the detail of it all. And that's how you're going to find the really interesting insights that are really going to be able to help you change the course of the organization or business that you're working for. Great data professionals are also great problem solvers. There's lots of different things that can go wrong, both from a technical perspective, but also in terms of the changing business, in terms of the quality of the data. And you're continuously, every day, going to be faced with a new set of problems. And you're going to have to solve them. And you're going to have to do a lot of that independently. And so being a great problem solver really makes a great data professional. I do think it's important to talk a little bit about the numeracy or the number side of things. One of the really big, I think, mistakes that people often think when they think about jobs and data is they think that you need really, really advanced mathematics or statistical skills in order to be a great data professional. And that honestly is just not true. To be perfectly honest, I've never actually studied math or statistics beyond my first year of university. You do need some base level of being quite comfortable working with sort of averages and trends and all of that kind of thing. But you do not need to have really advanced mathematical skills. There are certain, like a small number of job profiles that do require really advanced mathematics, but actually the vast majority, I would say like 90–95%, you can get by with sort of strong stats and a good, being really comfortable with numbers. And then the fifth one is subject matter expertise, which is, again, going back to that domain expertise and the business knowledge. Some of the best data analysts and data scientists that I've ever worked with are the ones who actually moved from being in the business themselves, so working in the different functions like operations or customer service or marketing or finance, and then want to become data professionals. And because they have that really deep understanding of what they're trying to do within their functions or within the business, it makes them really great because they, from a data perspective, because they understand what the data is showing them, and they're able to take that and translate that into really great impact on behalf of the company that they're working for. So overall, what makes a great data professional? It turns out it's a lot of things, and numbers is only just one part of it. And so when people think about the type of skills that they need and the experience that they require, this is where it's important to really take a step back and assess what skills and experience you already have. As I mentioned before, you really need the technical skills. So you need to make sure that you have that base level of understanding across what are the core technical skills that exist out there in data. What a lot of people do is they try to race ahead to Python or R, but actually where you should spend a lot of your time, particularly when you're first starting out, is on Excel. Excel is actually the true workhorse when it comes to data. You can actually interact directly with data. You can do all sorts of different things. And being an Excel wizard is actually probably one of the easiest and quickest ways you can start to get into the world of data. SQL is actually super important because actually that's where the vast majority of data is going to be stored in most companies. And so you need SQL to be able to access and transform data. And if you don't have any data, it's really hard to do your job. And then some kind of visualization platform. At iO-Sphere, we work with Power BI because it's excellent, but there's also ones like Tableau or things like that. Once you've got those things mastered and you really can start to understand how they fit together and which tool you should use where, that's when you can start to move into the more programmatic or coding-based languages, things like Python or R. My background's in R itself, so I've actually never learned how to use Python. One of the core competencies that I always looked for when I was hiring in data before is making sure that people understand what is the right tool for the right job. Because it's important to understand that each one of these tools has its strengths and its weaknesses, and we could have a whole other conversation about that. But some of them are going to be a lot faster at starting to deliver value, because actually when you're in a job or when you're in an organization, we're not looking for the most complicated or technical way of approaching something. We're looking for the fastest way to deliver impact or output. And so that's why I would highly recommend from a technical perspective that anybody who's interested in a career in data becomes really strong in Excel or Google Sheets, SQL and a visualization platform. And then once you're comfortable with those, you can start to layer on a coding approach. Now you need to combine that in equal weight or even more with getting some real world and hands-on experience. And there's lots of data sets. There's great data sets on Datacamp, but there's also ones on Kaggle, and you can just find data sets that exist on the internet. And what's important when you start to work with those real data sets is starting to figure out exactly what you would do with them, because what you need to do is move beyond just going through a list of technical activities that you're doing, and actually start to understand why you're doing something, and starting to understand what the real world application of the piece of analysis or the model you're building is actually for. How could you use that information or the work that you're doing in order to have somebody make a better decision, or be able to do something faster, or be able to, I don't know, have some kind of real impact on the business. And so as you're going through your technical development and your hands-on experience development, you need to make sure that you understand not only what you're doing, but why you're doing it. And if you can balance the two of those, that's when you're going to start to really differentiate yourself from the pack of individuals who are all looking for careers in data. And I have just to say again, I think Datacamp's an excellent place to learn some of the technical skills. I'm going to skip this one because I actually already said it. Just recapping where it is we're at so far. So one, I should definitely think that if you're interested in a career in data, you should absolutely go after it. And there's a whole bunch of different job profiles that you should research in order to figure out which is the right one for you. The easiest ones to get into from an entry level are going to be analytics from a more technical perspective, or something like data stewardship or governance from a less technical perspective. Once you understand the job profiles that you're really interested in, you need to go and get the technical skills and also a bit of experience in order to make sure that you understand how it is you can use those skills. And there's lots of different free resources on the internet, or you can do programs like ours, or you can do case studies with Datacamp, and there's lots of different ways you can do that. But you need to make sure that you're combining the technical side with the professional side. Once you're starting to feel confident with that, it's time to start thinking about your job search. And I think it's really important to state that it is not easy to look for a job in data. There's a lot of people that want to get into data. There's a lot of different companies hiring, and they're hiring for different things. And so there are no shortcuts, and it's going to take a lot of work. And it's something that can be quite difficult to manage from a motivation perspective. So you need to think about the sort of structures that you have in place for that. But I promise it's worth it. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the high-level approach that we talk about when we are talking about how to help people get through the job search part of things. So the first is that you need to have a CV, and you need to have a great CV. If you're in the US or Canada, you might call it a resume. My recommendation, unless you've got a ton of experience, is to try and get that down onto one page, one really clean and clear page, and to make sure you've got keywords on there, which are going to allow some of the different software that's out there to actually search for your CV to make sure that it thinks that you have the relevant skills. And then one of the hardest things to do is how to cut down the information in order to make sure that people are really seeing what's important to them. There's a lot of different stats that are out there. You know, do people spend 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds on a CV? It doesn't really matter because you cannot read that much information or consume that much information in such a short period of time. And the vast majority of people are going to have minutes worth of content on their CV. What you need to do is make sure that you're using formatting and like just cutting down a lot of the information to highlight the most important parts of your CV so that whoever's reviewing that CV is going to see what you want them to see. And it's really important if you're trying to get into data that you take all of the different experience that you have and you try and apply that within a data context. So you might have not worked in data, but maybe you've done a little bit of work with Excel, or you might have done something that has a good result. And so you need to put that out there. One of the core tips that we give people when they're building their CVs, and we give a lot of feedback on CVs here at iO-Sphere, is that you should use the format which is because of X, I did Y, which resulted in Z. What a lot of people have a tendency to do is that they have a tendency just to list out a whole bunch of activities that they did. My job was responsible for running surveys, or I was a waiter and I did these kinds of things. That's helpful, but actually what we're really trying to understand through a CV is like, what did you do? And did you understand why you did it? And was the result? And so the format of like, I did something because there was a reason for it, and that had an impact, is actually the most effective way that you can get that across in your CV. And so what you should do is go through each bullet point in your CV and make sure that each one highlights that you understood why you did something, that you yourself did something to impact it, and that there was an impact, there was a result on the back of it. The second thing you need to really do is start to research roles and companies in your area that you can apply to, and start to understand what's common across the different job descriptions or on their website. You need to really understand what type of company you want to work for, what type of job you want to do, and then also start to look for what they're looking for. And that's actually what they're looking for can help inform the previous bit around what skills and experience you actually need. One of the important questions that I always ask in an interview, and I think it's important that people start to understand in a for-profit environment, is how does a company make money? Because if you can understand how it makes money, you can start to understand where it is that you can add value and also understand what's important to that company itself. You can do things like look at news articles about companies. You can look at their annual reports if they're public. Most companies are going to have like a jobs page, and it's important that you actually read that and you really start to take it into account. What a lot of companies do is they actually ask questions related to what's on their job page. So what are their values and what they're looking for? And so it's important to be able to take those and translate them into questions. The next bit is a little bit challenging, and particularly people who are interested in data can have quite a hard time with it. I personally do not like cold networking, but it's something you're going to have to force yourself to do. It's probably the most effective way you can get into data, and that means going to meetups in your area. You can just look on meetup.com. There's lots of ones that are there, or just starting to look at people at companies that you're interested in and trying to connect with them and reaching out to them, and start to building up your own network of people that are working in data. It's important that when you're networking that you do that in a way that adds value for the other individual, because if you just connect with somebody and you're like, I really want a job in data, can you tell me how to get it? You're probably going to get ignored. It's important that you actually spend a lot of effort trying to understand, asking them questions about themselves. How did you get here? Do you like working at the company? What would you recommend to me? And through that, you can start to build up a relationship, and eventually you can use that relationship to maybe help recommend you for a job or for them to highlight you to a hiring manager. And then the fourth part, which is a little bit grueling, is that you need to make sure that you're applying to a lot of jobs. Because of just the way things are with LinkedIn and job boards and things like that, it is partially a numbers game. And so you need to make sure that you are applying to enough jobs out there so that you're getting in front of enough hiring managers and playing a bit of that numbers game. I do tell people to be a little bit hesitant around the Easy Apply on LinkedIn. Because of that, if you post a job with Easy Apply, you can get hundreds and hundreds of applications in one day. And there it just becomes a lottery. Who are the applications they're actually going to look at? And one of the big myths about that when you attach your CV is that people will see it. But that's not actually the case. It takes quite a bit of effort on Easy Apply on LinkedIn from the hiring manager side to actually see a CV. So if you're going to do Easy Apply, make sure that you're also complementing that with some normal applications. Okay, so you do that for a while and you're lucky and you've got an interview. What happens next? I think it's important to say that interviewing is a skill just like any other, and it takes a lot of practice. And interviewing it's quite different than like a normal conversation because it's very much one person trying to get information out of the other person. It can be very stressful. People can be very nerve-wracked, and people don't behave necessarily in the way that they normally would because you're a little bit stressed out. One of the easiest ways to get over that is to train yourself out of it, and to do that, you just need to practice. I cannot recommend to people enough that from the moment they're ready to start looking for a job or considering a career switch, that they start practicing immediately. And you need to practice by yourself out loud so that you get used to speaking and saying what you want to say. You can practice with friends, you can record yourself, and you can practice with anybody that's willing to do a practice interview with you. It's important that you do this and you do this consistently and continuously, because when you do get an interview, you never know how long of a lead time you're going to have. And so this is the kind of thing that you need to be truly prepared for. And I cannot recommend practicing enough. Recording it can be a little bit cringy. I definitely don't like looking at recordings of myself, but it is probably one of the easiest ways to give yourself feedback. And make sure that when you're doing these interviews with other people, that you're asking for a lot of feedback, and feedback on all sorts of different components of the interview. Because you need to make sure that you absolutely nail it. One of the things which is really important, and a lot of people overlook for some reason, even though it's kind of in a lot of different content, is the structure that you should use to answer some of the questions. Structure is extremely important because actually a lot of the times the interviewer on the other side is using structure in order to assess what it is that you're saying. The easiest one that we find here at iO-Sphere to use is the star format. And so within this, you should take, the goal is to be able to take each one of your stories and to make sure that you're getting all 5 of these across. So you need to talk about the situation. Why are we talking about this story based on the question that I've been asked? I need to talk about what the task is. So what did I do? What was I supposed to do? And the actions, what did I specifically do? Because the interview is one of the few times where you really need to focus on your performance and what you did. It's not a great time to use we, even though in most other conversations I would recommend using we, because you do things as a team. And because of the action you took, what was the result? What we're looking for a lot of the time when we're assessing people coming in is that they understood the action that they were supposed to take, and that action that they did take had a result. And sometimes that result was a good one or a not good one. And a lot of the times you're going to learn something off the back of it. And so to get brownie points, I would always recommend including the reflection side of things. So STAR is definitely the approach that I would recommend taking. And actually, the easiest thing that you can do is when you're starting to practice everything is to sit down and take your 5 or 6 or 7 stories that you have that you really want to get across, and to actually write them out in the STAR format so you can get used to saying them in that format. It can be a little bit weird when you first start doing it in that way, but I promise it's worth it. The other things that you should really focus on from a structure perspective is you're probably always going to get asked to tell me about yourself, why data, why this company, why this role. And you should be prepared to answer those, and you should practice doing so over and over again. The other thing which the STAR format allows you to do is to take some really well-structured stories, and ideally your best stories and responses, and use them to answer a whole bunch of different questions. Because that's one of the tricky parts with interviewing is you don't know what question you're going to get asked. And so being able to take your stories, which you're comfortable saying, and adapt them to different questions is a great thing to be able to do. I'm just going to talk through a few of my top interview tips, because interviewing is like one of the biggest hurdles that exists between where most of you are now and being able to get that job. And as I said before, it's just something you can learn. It's something you can get better at, and it's something you can progress at. It's a skill like any other, like your technical skills or your professional skills or anything like that. So one is make sure you're always early. It can be easy to, particularly in a digital world, to think you can just show up 1 minute before, but what if Zoom needs to update? You should always look to join calls at least 5 minutes early. And if you're going physically and in person, you should definitely be there 15 minutes early, so you get a chance to calm down, to settle yourself, so that you're not rushing in and all frazzled. If you're doing it on a video like this, then you need to make sure that the background behind you is either hidden or it's perfectly clean. I always recommend making sure that the camera is above you so that you're looking up at it and not down, because these little things and that first impression you make is actually super important. It can be really helpful to write down short notes, ideally in the STAR format. If you lose, if your mind goes blank during an answer or during a presentation, having just like one word written down in a really accessible way can be a great way to prompt yourself to remember where you were, so you can get back into it and continue. There's no problem, by the way, with going blank or forgetting something. That happens to everybody. So you should practice a little bit about what happens when you do that. Oh, I'm sorry, I went blank. Can I just check my notes and then start again? If you are lucky enough to be doing an interview over video, I really recommend getting Post-it notes and putting them around your screen with your stories on them, and STAR written down in 1 or 2 words by each letter in order to express, to trigger yourself to remember what it is you were talking about. And above all, make sure you remember why, because one of the things which happens a lot in interviews is that people forget why they're there, which is to sell yourself, but also that you're there to solve a problem on behalf of the company and the hiring manager. And that's how you always want to portray yourself. If you hire me, I'm going to make your life easier, and I'm going to do that quickly and easily. Companies are not there, and hiring managers are rarely there in order to hire people in order for them to develop their skills or to work on something about them. They're hiring them for a need. And it's important that you always put yourself in that frame of mind. I'm here to solve this problem for you, and I can do it because I have the right skills and experience, and I'm going to be a great team member. Some of these other things I think are quite common sense. Make sure that you're dressed appropriately for the company you're interviewing for. Make sure that you're happy and enthusiastic. First impressions matter, and people like people who are smiling and engaged and happy and that kind of thing. And so, if you're more introverted or you're a bit shy, which we all can be at times, you just kind of have to fake it till you make it. Make sure you put the energy in and the enthusiasm in, and then it's probably going to be responded to as well by the interviewers. Make sure you've got some really great questions prepared. And ask questions about, that show you're really interested in the role in the company. What's it like to work here? What kind of projects am I going to be working on? What's the team dynamic like? What do you look for? All these kinds of things. And I think the most important thing, not the most important thing, but one thing which I highly recommend is when an interview is over, make sure you send a thank you note. People talk about it a lot, but I would say that of all of the interviews that I've done, I've only gotten like 10 or 15 thank you notes, and it does make a difference because it shows that the person really cares. So I would highly recommend that you find a way, either reaching out to them on LinkedIn or kind of guessing their email address or just through the recruiter, to make sure that you reach out after an interview and you say thank you. Because remember, what you're trying to do is sell yourself, and you want them to see you as a solution to their problem, but also somebody that they want to work with each and every day. Okay, so just checking the time here, perfect. So you go through your interviews, you get the job offer, which is really, really exciting. You qualify that job offer to make sure that it's a company that you want to work for. And now it's time for you to start your first job in data, which can be really, really nerve-wracking. So I'm just going to round it out by just giving you a few tips for starting that first job. The first is you're probably going to have a little bit of time between when you get the offer and before you start. Take that time to learn a lot about the industry and role and the team that you're going to be working for. There's tons of information on the internet about all sorts of different industries and companies, learn who the competitors are. Try to understand how your team is going to fit into that company and that industry. Understand what it is your role is going to do, and make sure that you're prepared to do all of that. Because what people really want is that when you start, you hit the ground running. And the more information you can acquire before you start, the easier that's going to be for you. Once you start in that job, by the way, learning is not over. You're going to spend a lot of time trying to get to know people, trying to understand what's already been built, so you can build on that as opposed to starting from scratch. And it's important to remember that, as I've said before, and I think it's been said a lot of times, data, while there's a large technical component to it, there's a huge interpersonal bit of it. You're going to be working with stakeholders and team members, other team members. You're going to be working with engineering functions and your manager and all sorts of different people. And it's important you invest in those relationships. You get to know people, you start to understand what their problems are, what they've done so far, so you can add value to them. And also make sure that when you're building those relationships and you're finding out information, you're writing it down, you're taking notes, because what people don't want to do is to be repeating or answering the same questions over and over again. So make sure you learn what you can from somebody, you document it, and you build those relationships with an eye to how it is that you can start to understanding how you fit into the broader team. Because one of the tricky parts within many jobs is understanding exactly what your role is and understanding how it is that you fit into the broader organization and all the different teams and people that are out there. And this can take a little while. Your manager will obviously be a great source of information there, but also all the different people that you work with. And so trying to understand, what do you do? What are you working on? How do you know that? Can be really helpful to understand what they do so you can understand how it is that you fit in. The next step, I would say, is to make sure that you establish goals early on. Why do I say this? Because one of the things that's really, really easy within data is to just start doing stuff. Writing queries, building dashboards, trying to understand what's going on in different visualizations. But that might feel like you're doing a lot, but it might not necessarily be accomplishing what it is that you're in that job to do, or the impact that you're trying to go for. And so it's important pretty early on to have a conversation with your manager and your teammates to understand, like, what should be my goals over the next 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and 6 months or something like that. Because then you have a pretty clear idea about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And you can really focus your energy around that, as opposed to all sorts of different activities that can come up really, really quickly. And finally, and most importantly, in my opinion, and I talk about this a lot, it's important to remember why you're there. And you're there because you need to have an impact. When people are hiring individuals into teams, or when they're they're expanding their team, or they're backfilling or something like that, they're doing it for a reason, because there's some kind of body of work that they want to be done, and they need somebody to have an impact. And so within data, one of the big problems, as I just said previously, is that people can spend a lot of time building new dashboards or visualizations or doing something really complicated and to an utmost degree. But actually what most companies and teams are looking for is somebody to have a really big impact. They want results. And so it's not okay just to do a piece of work. You need to make sure that the stakeholders understand that piece of work and that they choose to do something differently off the back of it. And if you can do that and you can have an impact, that's when you're going to be absolutely successful and really take off in your career. And that's when the fun is just going to begin. When we talk about impact in data, actually probably in most kinds of roles, there's 3 ways that we think about it in a sort of commercial or business sense. One is that you can be talking about how to increase revenue. The second one is that you can be talking about how to decrease costs. And the third one is about how you can talk about decreasing risk. So that means something is more likely to happen, or you have a better idea about what will happen in the future. And so you should be able to take all of the activity that you're doing, all of your goals, all the people you're meeting, and try to channel that down into understanding, what is the impact that you can have in your job, and what is that going to mean for the company itself. Cool. So just to recap, I'm actually going to go back here. Jobs in data are great jobs, and there are all sorts of different profiles. So depending on your skill set and your background, there is probably a job for you, and I would highly recommend that you go after doing it. In general, you need to think about the skills in a much broader sense than just the technical skills. You definitely need the technical skills, and Datacamp is a great place to go and get those, and it's the ones that we use at iO-Sphere. But you also need to think about how you can build up the experience using those skills in a way that adds value for the company that you're trying to approach. And think about the skills that go just beyond the technical skills, things like business acumen, professional skills, and soft skills. Once you feel like you're ready and you've got the necessary experience and skills in order to start applying for jobs, you need to make sure that you do that in a structured way and know that it's going to take quite a bit of effort, particularly when you're trying to break in for the first time. You need a great CV. You need to put a lot of effort into networking, going to meetups, meeting people, and really making sure that you're building relationships with them and applying to a lot of jobs. Interviewing is a skill like any other and requires a lot of practice. And you can practice from now up until the point that you end up getting a job. You can record yourself, you can practice with yourself, you can practice with friends. The important thing is to make sure that it's very realistic and that you practice saying your answers out loud, and you practice saying not only answers to questions like, tell me about yourself, why this company, why this job, why this industry, but also really structuring your best stories using the STAR format in a way that you're going to be able to get those across in a well-rehearsed and concise manner to your interviewers. And once you land that job, that's only just the beginning. That's where the fun begins. You need to make sure that you are excited and ready. You understand the value that you can bring. You set clear goals for yourself. You meet your teammates. You really start to understand how you can fit into the picture. And then you start to deliver impact from day one. And if you do that, you're going to have a great career in data. And that is all that I have.
All right, super. Thank you for that, James. That was really informative, like a lot of just practical advice there that people can use for their job searches. So one thing I really like was you talked about networking and how you've got to contact with people. One of my top tips for networking is if you're in a webinar, you go to a meetup, ask the presenter a question, because that's going to help them notice you. So for anyone in the audience, please do ask questions for James in the chat now. We have a few questions already. I've actually got a couple of questions for you before we go to the audience questions. So you talked about a lot of different skills there. I think a lot of people get lost about where to start. So is there a natural order in which you can learn skills? Like, are there some simple things to get started with and you move on to the advanced things later?
I think so. I think the easiest place to start actually with some of it is from the technical perspective, because there's really great resources that are out there and there's well-defined curriculums that you can progress in. Some of the more subtle stuff around soft skills are things that you're going to need to do reading about or listen to podcasts or find courses that can help you with that. And then as you get closer and closer to your job search, that's where I suggest moving more into the application and experience side of things, trying to find real case studies and working on those, understanding how you can translate them into value for employers, and really starting to research the companies themselves.
Okay, I like that. So you can get a few technical skills and some soft skills to begin with, and then applications and like really demonstrating that you have those skills later on. Okay, and since you talked a lot about soft skills, collaboration was one that you mentioned. How do you demonstrate that you can collaborate with other people?
It's a great question. There's actually tons of ways that people can do it. But the easiest way is when you're thinking about the stories that you're framing or when you're writing your CV is talking about how you were part of a team, how you work with these people, how you influence them, and try to find different ways of bringing out that you're quite collaborative. It's honestly, when you're in an interview as well, you can just say it. I enjoy working with people. I enjoy getting out of my chair and going and talking to different stakeholders or just talking to different people. And that's one of the easiest ways to explain it. But in general, everybody's going to have worked in a group or with people at some point in time. And so you just need to highlight that you're comfortable doing that.
Okay, so it doesn't need to be an example of collaborating with someone on data. It's just like, I have worked with other people and this is an example of it, and that's going to get you a long way.
Absolutely. Because within data, one of the tricky parts is that you work with obviously other people that exist within data, but you also spend a lot of time working with non-technical users, with different parts of the business, with all sorts of different people. And so as long as you can demonstrate that you are comfortable and you enjoy working with people and you have a few tools in order to do that effectively, I'd be quite happy with that.
Okay. And another soft skill that seems you've mentioned a lot is communication. So do you have any advice on how you can demonstrate that you have communication skills?
That's a great one. there's a few ways to do it kind of from the get-go. One is when you're doing your written application, you need to make sure that, and your CV, you need to make sure that that is actually written in a really, really clear and concise way. The number of CVs that I get that come through that actually have like spelling mistakes, or people might have spent a lot of time on their CV, but then in the actual written application, they make all sorts of grammatical and spelling mistakes. That's actually an immediate rejection from my side. Because within data, you're looking for people that have great communication skills. And there's lots of different things that you can do to build up in practice. There's like free events like Toastmasters you can do if you're really uncomfortable presenting. But there's lots of different ways that people can communicate, and you just need to highlight how it is that you've done that specifically and understand that that is what you've been doing, and make sure that people understand that it worked.
Okay, so yeah, plenty of opportunities for either public speaking or I guess writing about things that you've done, both important forms of communication. And probably on the spelling and grammar point, this can be solved by software now, right? Like Grammarly is your
friend.
You
would think so, but there seems to be all sorts of ways of it still kind of sneaking through. But yeah, I do think, even just in like little blurbs, like I gave this presentation, or I spoke in this little way, even in, as a server or something like that, like I spoke at this thing, it's quite easy to do.
Excellent. The one other soft skill that a lot of managers have told me they really value is ownership. Can you just explain what that means and how you might demonstrate it?
Yeah, that's actually an excellent one. It's not one that I called out specifically, but for me, ownership is somebody being able to take a problem and know that it's theirs and theirs to solve, and then to be able to run with it through to completion. Because one of the things you're really looking for, particularly if you're managing a big team or you've got a lot of different moving parts, is for somebody to be able to take something and take that and run with it. And so when we talk about ownership, it's the ability to delegate a problem to somebody and for them to actually own that through and through. There's a few things that are useful from a skill perspective there. Like one is understanding a few like basic frameworks around projects. Also, when I was talking about goals, if you can understand how your projects that you own ladder into your goals, that can help drive a lot of clarity for you as an individual.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I have to say, it's amazing how much time managers spend complaining that they have to tell their employees what to do with every step of everything. So I can see why ownership is an important thing. All right, let's go to audience questions. So this first one is from Chief Sweetus. So can you talk about how to get remote jobs and volunteering opportunities for starters?
So those are kind of two separate things for me. So one, if we talk about remote jobs, I think you would approach that in much the same way that you would approach many other, like the standard job search. What you just need to do is make sure that you are qualifying a job as being properly remote first, because what does happen, and that you are capable of delivering that in a remote way. What does happen a fair amount is that you get people applying out of time zone. And so if you happen to be 12 hours different on time zone, then it's unlikely that you're going to be able to do that job from a remote perspective. And you need to usually have like great internet and the right setup at home. So if you can qualify a job as being properly remote and that you're able to deliver it, then I would approach it very much in the same way. There are actually lots of like great online networking events where you can go to. You can take the same approach of looking at people who work at that company and trying to reach out to them to start to understand, how it is that they got there and what it is that people are looking for. But I would approach that in much the same way. Volunteering is slightly different, but I would probably approach it actually a lot of the same way, which is usually with volunteering, there are some types of organizations that are a lot easier to approach. One is like charities, because they're usually unable to afford their own data teams and are really looking for help. But you need to do it in a lot of the same way, which is starting to build relationships with people, networking with them, and then starting to volunteer your time. And when you are volunteering your time, it's important you really, again, think about everything we talked about during the presentation, which is that they are looking for somebody to help them and add value and have an impact. And so you need to really frame all of your ability to do that in that context, so that then they can understand that they actually bring you on and they let you do something with them, that they know it's going to add value to them as opposed to be a big hindrance.
That's great advice. And certainly that time zone thing for the remote opportunities is very important. You really don't want to be working at midnight every night just because your boss is in a different time zone. All right. Next question is from Nelson. So Nelson wants to know, where can I get information about open projects to start building a data portfolio?
Excellent question. There's actually two sides to that, which I'm going to answer separately. One is where you can get open projects. Like there's websites like Kaggle. You can just Google like sample data sets. Datacamp has a bunch. There are like tons and tons of resources that exist that are out there that will give you data sets and like an idea about what you're trying to do. The one thing which I would caution you from that perspective, though, is to really think about why you're doing the project or the thing that you're doing. What would be the impact that you could have? What decision could you make differently? What would you do off the back of it? What a lot of people have a tendency to do is be like, look, I took this data set and I did this thing off the back of it. And then they don't understand why they did that. They just know that they did do it. And that's one of the things that really differentiates people. Being able to understand why you did it and put that in that context. The portfolio question is an excellent question. And it's probably one I get asked like, I don't know, every week. There are scenarios when having a portfolio can be a very useful thing. But it is also a bit of a risk from your job search. One of the things that people tend to use a lot is GitHub. I understand there's actually one on Datacamp that you can use as well. What happens with a lot of portfolios is that people will do one project and they will, they'll do it well technically, but they won't put a lot of the context around it. And then they will publish that to their portfolio. And then time will go by. And so they've only done one project and it was 18 months ago or something like that. And they're not keeping their portfolio up to date. And so when you share that portfolio, it actually doesn't become that useful. And in some ways, it's also a little bit risky because if you made a bunch of mistakes in it, then it's not going to help you out. However, if you're properly committed to building a proper portfolio where you're going to publish something to it every week over a period of time, and you're going to use that as a way to demonstrate the value that you can add to an organization, then I would suggest doing that. But always make sure that whatever project or thing you're pushing into GitHub or Datacamp or something like that, that you are very clear at the top, like, I understood why I did this. This is why I did it. This is the impact it could have. And here's the supporting evidence to help me do that. And make sure that you get somebody else to check over the technical side to make sure you're not making a whole bunch of really terrible mistakes, because it can be pretty easy to do that.
Yeah, certainly a bad portfolio is maybe worse than having no portfolio.
Absolutely.
But that said, this is a very timely discussion because, first of all, every Datacamp subscriber gets access to a portfolio page. So if you want to build up a data portfolio, you can do that from your Datacamp account. And secondly, next Tuesday, we have a webinar that's going to teach you how to build a data portfolio. So I believe Reach has posted a link in the chat. Do register for that. And I hope to see you next Tuesday if that's something you're interested in. Okay, next question comes from Abid saying, can I get a job in the US or Canada based online if I don't live there? I actually have a story about this, but James, I'll let you go first.
So I would say, yes, it is possible, but you need to think about everything that we talked about earlier. You need to make sure that you have the appropriate language capabilities, that you're in the right time zone, and that you have access to good internet. I do know lots of people that work for American or Canadian companies and are not based there. However, it's also a lot challenging. It's very challenging because a lot of people want those jobs. And so that's something you need to think about. You're adding a lot more competition to yourself, and it's very difficult to stand out. So that means you need to go above and beyond when it comes to being able to demonstrate your value, understand how it is that you are going to be able to make yourself stand out in that environment.
Yes, and certainly quite often it's more senior roles where companies are willing to do that and have someone based in a completely different company, completely different country, whereas the junior roles, they want someone in office. So my story around this is when I applied to work at Datacamp, I didn't hear back for weeks. I was thinking, this job is made for me. I'm sure I should at least get a first round interview. So I emailed the careers email address and eventually heard back from them. Oh yeah, we'd love to have an interview with you. I found out that when I first applied, it seemed at the time I was living in Qatar. So I was in the Middle East applying for a job in the US, and the person in HR just binned my CV immediately. It was like, okay, wrong time zone. Yeah, we're not going to bother with this. And it was only once I'd sent in an extra email to show that I was really dedicated, and it had gone to someone beyond the people team. Actually, the CEO had seen the email, and they said, "Okay, actually, yeah, Richie's qualified for this job. Maybe we'll give him an interview." So certainly, a bit of persistence can help there. It is much harder to get a job when you're applying to a different country. All right, next question comes from Romy. So. Oh, actually, there's not so much a question, it's more of a comment. Yeah, saying I'm interested in all these different topics. Okay, we'll move on from this one. Let's try this one from another one from Nelson. So Nelson wants to know about internship programs. Where might you find an internship?
It's a great question. Internships can be very useful, and there are. The only thing is to think is that there's actually a lot more people who want internships than there are internships available. So you need to take a lot of the steps that we've talked about previously in order to make yourself stand out. You need to network. You need to make sure you've got the right skills and experience that they're looking for. You need to make sure your CV is on point, so that you actually get the opportunity to interview for an internship. In general, I think most internships will be advertised on places, job platforms like LinkedIn and Indeed or Reed or something like that. They're very useful in terms of building experience. And the bigger, like more established companies, they're the ones who tend to operate the bigger internship programs. Smaller companies do have smaller ones, but they'll probably only take 1 or 2 internships. So if I was going to target an internship, I would look at like quite large companies that have established internship programs, and then really try to make yourself stand out there.
Excellent. Yeah, certainly they do seem to be quite seasonal. So you get summer internships, and
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
time for different types of the year. So yeah, you just got to time that right if you want an internship. All right. So Jonathan is commenting on your point about having a thank you note. Now, this is something that's interesting to me because in England, sending a thank you note after an interview was not the done thing. But I was only like in the US, I discovered, yeah, this is like standard practice for politeness. You send a thank you note. So is there some kind of cultural component to whether you should do this?
I assume that there is like some kind of done thing or cultural component to it, but I have to say, and maybe it's also because in Canada it's quite common to send them, so I'm used to it. But I have to say, to me, it always makes somebody stand out because it implies that usually, you know, if you take a moment to reflect on the interview, talk about what went well, it didn't well, and just make a short note and say, I'm actually super interested in this job, then the person who receives that goes, oh, they are very interested. Let me make sure I remember them. Let me make sure I understand what, you know, their pros and cons were, and it really does highlight you. So I highly recommend doing it all the time. But I'm sure there are examples of different countries and cultures where it would be a little bit
odd. Yeah, so it seems like it's a fairly low effort thing that's just going to help you stand out just a little bit. Okay.
Exactly. It feels like the risk would be quite low.
Yeah, and I was going to say, oh, they sent a thank you note. Let's just
cancel. Well, make sure that the spelling and grammar is great. Make sure the spelling and grammar is great.
All right. Oh, this is a very good question. Isha asks, which podcast would you recommend for learning more about data?
Oh, that's actually a great question, and one that I don't know the answer to because I actually don't really listen to podcasts. But Richie, do you know any?
Well, one does spring to mind. You should definitely listen to the Data Frame podcast. So that's Datacamp's podcast. I'm one of the hosts, and we do talk about careers and skills a lot. So yeah, that's your number one choice.
Excellent answer.
All right. So next question comes from JB. So you touched on how much mathematics you need to know. Do you want to go into a bit more detail about like what sort of maths do you need in order to get a job?
So I think you need something in the range of like first year statistics for non-mathematical people. So something like, so I studied medical sciences, and in medical sciences, you do like an intro to stats module at the beginning of your university. If you are comfortable with like averages, trends, distributions, thinking about how those different things can interact. If you understand, if you want to go a little bit further and you understand a bit about like basic linear regression, so understanding how you would fit a line through different data points, you understand how to read different charts and all that kind of things, to be honest, like you can get quite far. That's probably about the limit of my own personal knowledge. One of the things also, which I think is quite a common misconception, is that to get into data science, and when I talk about data science, I'm talking a lot more about the machine learning side of things, is again that you need really great mathematical skills. I just don't think that's actually true. What you need is really good, like you need the complete portfolio, because you need to understand what it is you're trying to do. You need to understand how it is you're going to apply what you're doing, and then you get to use in a lot of cases just like standard out-of-the-box algorithms. One of the reasons at iO-Sphere that we don't actually train for machine learning at the entry level is because, one, there's not that many jobs that exist where you're actually doing machine learning models straight out of the get-go, especially at the entry level. But the other thing is that the actual machine learning building model is, it's just a few lines in code. And it's not that complicated. And actually, there's whole software packages or companies out there that actually do AutoML now, which is like, they just automate the full machine learning process. What's going to differentiate you and allow you to get the job and actually be really successful is being able to do all the other parts. Understand the business, understand how you translate that into requirements, how you take those requirements, how you build them in the data sets, how you ensure that the data is of high quality going into your models, how you understand what the model is doing, how you understand what the output is going to be used for, and all that kind of stuff. That takes a bit of experience.
Absolutely, yeah. So I suppose thinking about just the example of simple statistics, you do descriptive statistics. Well, it's kind of helpful to know like when you should use mean versus median and be able to talk about, well, why you would pick one or the other for a particular business metric, but you don't necessarily need to go too deep into linear algebra or something.
No, I completely agree. And actually, there's really great free resources that are out there. In general, for our programs, that we look for some sort of level of numeracy ahead of time. But like Khan Academy is a great free online resource, and they have everything you can need plus a lot more. And like if you just know sort of if you're really solid around how to work with numbers and a little bit of statistics in particular, then you'll be absolutely fine. And then there's whole jobs that don't involve like a lot of numeracy around data governance and data stewardship and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. All right. So next question comes from Sahana. So Sahana, are there any emerging technologies or methodologies you recommend staying up to date on?
Oh, such a great question. One of the things that people easily do, and which is where I think they really go wrong, is that they tend to spend much time going to like new and emerging technologies, and then they forget all the basics, which are what actually people are doing in their day-to-day jobs and what's going to get you employed. My favorite example is this concept of deep learning. People love deep learning, and they love learning deep learning. And most other boot camps spend a lot of time on deep learning, and master's degrees spend time on deep learning. And there are like 7 people that work in like normal jobs that work on deep learning, and they probably all have like a master's or a PhD in it. I would skip all of that kind of stuff, and I would spend most of your time really trying to understand the basics and understand how they fit together. And I really do mean Excel, SQL, Power BI, or some kind of visualization platform, and maybe a little bit of Python or R. SQL is the main thing that you need to know. You need to absolutely be super rock solid and understand what you're doing and also why you're doing it there. And then, of course, there's a few cool things that happen as you go.
Yeah, so I agree with all that, but one thing I would say is that being able to use generative AI tools to help make you more productive is incredibly important. So you don't necessarily need to be able to build ChatGPT from scratch yourself, but just knowing how to use it in order to make yourself more productive is going to be a benefit.
I completely agree. That's the easiest way you can take yourself to the next level when it comes to particularly the technical side of things. And actually a lot from the business acumen side is using some of those tools in order to elevate your performance. So you should definitely stay up to date in terms of what's available there. And yeah, just using it to your advantage.
Absolutely. We're coming up to time, and there are a few more questions that I want to get to, so perhaps overrun by a couple of minutes. Before that, I just want to say, again, we've got a webinar on portfolios next Tuesday, and the day after there is a webinar on data cleaning. Now, for people doing the Datacamp certifications, so we do professional certifications for data analysts, data scientists, data engineers, data cleaning or failing to clean your data properly is the #1 reason why people fail our certification. So if you're interested in getting certified, if you want to get like a professional job, please scan the QR code and get yourself registered for those events. So, all right. With that, we've got time for a couple more questions. So let's go to the next one from Amaranta. So Amaranta asks, what about people changing their career into data? How do you approach that?
Oh, I think it's excellent. At iO-Sphere, I would say 60% of the trainees that we have coming through our programs are actually career switchers. And in many ways, I think they make the best data professionals. And why do I say that? Because one, they've got a little bit of that real world and real life experience, so that's helped build up their soft skills, their professional skills. They will probably have a good understanding about the business. But the most important thing is that particularly if you start to work on the data side of the function that you were in or the job that you were in before, you have such good insight into what the people on the other side are actually doing when they're generating the data or what's actually happening, that you can be so effective from day one. It's incredible. And so I highly recommend people to think about switching their careers into data, and it's a great place to be.
Absolutely. Like, you don't need to start directly at the beginning of your career.
No.
So many data jobs now that, people can move from anywhere. All right. So next question comes from Jack. So Jack asks, what's the difference between like doing self-study and the more traditional classroom learning? So do you need to have a degree, or are there other ways of doing it?
No, definitely not. You definitely don't need to have a degree. And I think that's another big misconception. I didn't really have time to talk about it today. But some of the very best analysts that I've ever known did not have degrees. And I'm super supportive of that approach in. It's a whole different topic about what I think about traditional education. What's important is that you understand, that you put the effort in and that you try to understand how it is that you can get to where you want to be. Some people are able to self-motivate and get themselves all the way there on their own. Other people do need either an accelerated approach, so that's the kind of thing that we deliver, or they want to do some kind of degree to have a little bit more structure around them and to hold themselves accountable as they go through. But no, you definitely do not need a degree.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing is, a university degree is spectacularly more expensive than a Datacamp subscription. So
I completely agree.
Yeah. Yes. So, all right. Next question is from Jason. So, how valuable is having a certification, particularly if you don't have any experience in data?
I think it can be super useful. The only thing to think about is that there are lots and lots of certifications that are available that are out there, and they are definitely of variable quality. Datacamp, I think, is actually one that's relatively well known, so that would be a useful one to complete all the way through. But ultimately, even if you have a certification, you're still going to be asked a lot of the questions and things that we talked about today. And so that's where it's important to be able to say, look, I know I can prove that I have the technical skills because, look, I did the certification, but I actually know what I did that for, and I'm able to apply that into the real world is really important. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. We've got about 20 questions, but I don't think we're going to have time to get to them all. Okay, so this one comes from Rutgva. So what about data engineering? So that's a slightly different beast to being a data analyst or data scientist. You just want to talk a little bit about how you get into data engineering?
Yeah, it is definitely a bit of a different beast. And what's interesting is similar to what I was talking about before, like lots of different companies are going to have data engineers that do different kinds of functions. The thing is, if you're going to go into data engineering, you definitely need to have really strong technical skills, but there's a body of skills which are a little bit complicated to get when you're doing self-study there. And that's how you work in collaborative code bases. That's how you understand how modern pieces of technology fit together. And it's difficult to do that when you're just sort of learning that on your own. I would highly recommend that if you want to go into data engineering, I actually think the easiest thing to do without going to do a degree is to actually do something like go to become a data analyst first, or to do that in a couple different steps. So you can get in, you can start to get some experience, you start working with those teams, and then you understand the skills and the experience that's required in order to switch into data engineering. It's the same reason that we only train for data engineering at the more experienced level, because it's very difficult to get that first job if you don't have a really solid background in sort of computer science and coding and collaborative coding and all that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So yeah, maybe not ideal for the very, very, very first.
Yeah, exactly. But definitely possible to do from all sorts of different backgrounds again. I don't think you need a degree.
All right, super. So final question before we break, because we're running over time. This one comes from Pfizer saying, I got an interview. That sounds good. Everything went well. I was told to get an offer the next day, and then they ghosted me. So what that sounds like pretty bad practice on the part of whoever was running that. But can you talk about how to deal with rejection?
This is actually, I think it's, I mean, that does sound like terrible practice. And so I'm sorry that you had to go through that. The rejection is the hardest part because in many ways, actually, applying for jobs is a little bit like dating. You just get a lot of rejection. And you just have to be able to move through it and to go on to the next one. It can be a little bit annoying, and you can really get down about it. I think one of the challenging parts about really trying to get into a new industry or switch into an industry is that it takes time and that you have to put in the effort. And being able to hold yourself accountable and do that over time is actually, it's tricky to be able to maintain your motivation. It's, I think that's actually probably one of the hardest things to be able to get people to do it. It's one of the reasons, after our programs, we actually support them for 6 full months afterwards by checking with everybody every week to make sure that they are keeping up their motivation and morale, and that they keep pushing and pushing. Because if you do that, you will end up getting a job at some point.
Absolutely. I think it goes back to the point you mentioned about numbers beforehand, because I think even if you're getting 5-10% callback rate for a first round interview, that's really impressive. You just do have to send in a lot of applications to get anywhere.
I completely agree. I think 1% or 2% would actually be pretty good in this day and age. So yeah, you just have to keep going and keep going and keep going.
Absolutely. All right, there you go. That's your motivation for you. Just keep going and you will make it towards.
You will get there eventually.
Yes, excellent. All right, thank you so much for your time, James. So much insight there. That was absolutely brilliant.
No worries.
Excellent. And thank me. Yeah, glad to have you. Thank you, Reese, for moderating. Thank you to our to everyone who asked a question. Sorry we didn't get to all your questions. I really do like the enthusiasm there. And thank you to everyone who showed up. I hope to see you all again in future webinars.